Thanks for tuning in. A rose by any other name is still a rose, even when it's made of steel. Today we're going to look at how I make these steel forever roses. If you like these videos, let me know by liking and subscribing. I also have paper instructions, which I'll link below in the comments. To start off with, we're going to start making the leaves and the stem. I'm going to start off with some 5/8 inch stock to make the leaves. We'll throw that in the forge and then start creating a taper. We're going to create a taper at the end of our stock, throw it back in the forge, and then we're going to isolate that taper. Once we've got it isolated, we're going to actually start drawing it out to create the stem of the leaf. And I'm actually going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to move over from the anvil to the press and just draw out that stem of the leaf a little bit easier. While things are heating up in the forge, what I did is I took a cheap hammer I bought from Canadian Tire and I scored it, but I should have scored it at an angle. That way it would have been easier. Now I don't have my hand over the hot steel. Next time I need one, I'll do that. But what I'm going to do is texture the stem so that it looks a little bit more rose-like. Once I've got the leaf stem isolated, I'm going to actually just measure it against the stem just to make sure that we don't go from skinny to fat. And now it's time to actually make the leaf. I'm going to use the press instead of a hammer, but I'm just pressing down on the diagonal of the part that we isolated and making it flat so that we get a leaf shape. I'm going to use the hammer to clean it up, stretch it out, and get something that's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. Here we're using that special hammer I made to actually add some texture to the stem. And this is where if I did it again, I would make sure I definitely put my angles on a diagonal so that I'm not holding my hand right over the hot piece of steel. I hate hammering with a glove on. Now we're going to texture the leaves. I'm just going to use the hammer and chisel in a vise. And I'm going to start at the front and just put some little notches in that gives the edge of the leaf a little bit of a serration. To put the veins in the leaves, I'm going to use this little tool holder I made that just simply holds the chisel. I just need one more hand. So that I'm going to just strike it with the hammer and start adding some lines to the leaf. To give the leaf a little bit of shape, I'm going to use the ledge on the anvil and a ball peen hammer, and I'm just hammering in a little bit of a curve. I'm not heating it up or anything else, partly because I like the marks the ball peen is leaving on the leaf. It adds a little bit of texture. And then we'll use the horn to curve down the end of the leaf a little bit, just to give it a little bit of overall shape. Just to heat them up so that we can draw out the stems. They're kind of fat at the end and I need to get them a little thinner. So back in the forge and a little bit of drawing action. A little bit of cleanup so that we can remove some of the forge scale and we're ready to weld them together. I'm going to TIG weld the leaves on. My biggest challenge always is trying to figure out how to clamp them up. Once I've got the leaves welded up, I'm going to put them on the stem. I'm going to put them between 5 and 6 inches below the top of the stem. Time for the petals. I use old barrels and I cut the strips off of them, and then I actually have some templates that I made out of steel one day I have paper templates on my website on the articles page, so feel free to go download them. There's also an article on how I do this as well if the video doesn't do it for you. But I'm simply going to straighten out a section of the barrel and put the templates on, mark them up, and then start off with the plasma cutter. You don't need to use a plasma cutter. I used to use an angle grinder. Once we've got them all cut out, I take them over to the bandsaw just to clean up all of the edges, a little less grinding. Drill some holes so we can add them to the stem. And then back over to the 2x72 to clean up all of the edges, adding some shape where we can. I have to bend them a little bit to get them on the 2x72, move the belt around, but eventually we get nice clean templates. I'm going to use the angle grinder and a flap disc to clean up all of the paint and oxides on the petals. I use magnets to hold them to the top and then just simply scrape off all of the paint. Now I'm actually going to put a couple notches into the leaves. If you take a look at a rose petal, quite often they split as they're opening up. So I take 2 or 3 and I just cut a little notch into them. Next, we have to texture the leaves. To use that, I use a chipping hammer on top of a log. The log is a little bit punky, so it's soft and allows me to dent up the leaves using the sharp edge of the chipping hammer, and it creates quite a nice texture for the rose. To put the petals on the stem, we're actually going to put a tenon on the rose. I should have done this before I put the leaves on. Would have been a little easier, but it still wasn't too bad. We'll cut the stem off at 16 inches. We'll do it at a little bit of an angle like you were actually cutting a rose, and then we'll sand it off just to get rid of any burrs and sharp points. And now the fun part, it's starting to actually look like a rose. We'll stack up all of our leaves. I'm going to make sure I put the marked side up on the bottom one and then the marked side down so that when we fold up the leaves, it looks like we've got a textured rose petal. I do bend the leaves so that they all fit snug. I want them to fit right down tight against the bottom of the tenon. So sometimes you have to bend the leaves up and down just to make sure that the center section's stacked tightly. To tighten everything up, you could actually peen the top of the tenon over. I'm actually going to use a TIG welder and just simply weld it on and make a nice tight seal. To start shaping the leaves, I'm going to use some normal pliers, some needle nose pliers, and some heat. Heat can come from anywhere. I just use a little propane torch. We're going to heat up the first leaf and we're going to coil it really tightly to be the center of the rose. Then we're going to take the top and we're going to just flare it out just a little bit. So if you actually look at a real rose, you'll see that it just starts to flare out at the top. This is just a matter of heating, bending, and making sure you don't touch the rose because it's hot. It's glowing red at this point. When I actually get things wrapped up, one of the things I will do is I'll take the lock joint pliers and actually press things together really tightly at the bottom, as tight as I can. I want to keep the bottom of that rosebud nice and tight. Once we've got the initial petal folded over and rolled in, we now just start rolling all of the leaves in, going in a clockwise manner. So it's just take the next leaf, wrap it around, pinch it in, and repeat the process until all of the leaves are folded up. At this point, you can see where we had one of the leaves where we put the little notch in the edge of the petal. It just adds a little bit more realism, so I really want to make sure I bend it and separate that little cut so that we actually get a really nice looking petal. The last part is to move on and form the bottom petals. These were the leaves that actually enclosed the rosebud before it started to open. So they tend to curl outwards. So we actually want to curl them the opposite. They're usually a little bit messed up. So I try not to make them all look the same, but it's exactly the same process, just moving each of the little leaves. It's starting to actually look a lot like a rose at this point. The final touch we're going to do is we're actually going to polish it up. I'm going to use a brass, it has to be 100% brass wire brush. I put it in the Dremel. I heat up the rose to start with, and as we start to brush things on, what we'll find is the brass from the brush will transfer onto the rose, creating some really nice highlights. We just go around all of it. I'm not trying to get it all, I'm just trying to create highlights on the edge of the petals. This rose is actually going to be etched on the back of the leaves with some names and a date. I'm going to do it exactly the way I etch my maker's mark on my knives. I'll put a link above to see how I do my electro etching. But this makes a really nice piece for a coffee table, end table, mantle, or just a general gift. Thanks for watching. If you like this, please like and subscribe.